Hi viewers, welcome back to Silent Case, where every whisper from the past finds its voice. Here, we uncover the truths buried in shadows, one forgotten mystery at a time. Today's case takes us deep into a river that has held its secret for over 50 years, a truth that was never meant to resurface. Subscribe and watch the full story now. On the night of October 17th, 1972, Riverbend felt like a town caught between seasons. The last warmth of autumn clung to the air, but the wind carried the crisp bite of winter approaching. Streetlights flickered along Willow Lane, buzzing softly, casting elongated shadows over the cracked pavement. It was the kind of night people remembered years later, not because of the weather, but because of what it stole. Lena Carter, 17, walked ahead with her coat pulled tight, her boots tapping in a steady rhythm. Mara, 14, followed closely, her breath visible in the cool air. They had stayed later than planned at the community center, helping clean up after a fall charity event. Witnesses would later recall seeing the sisters laughing as they left, their silhouettes illuminated by the orange glow of the parking lot light. They weren't laughing now. The sisters took the familiar route home, one they had walked 100 times. It cut through the town's quiet center, past the shuttered bakery, then curved toward Briarwood Bridge, the old steel structure arching over the slow-moving river. Most avoided the bridge at night. It moaned when the temperature dropped and rattled when trucks crossed, as if it were alive and restless. But for Lena and Mara, it was simply the fastest way home. Wind skimmed across the water, carrying with it a faint metallic tang. The river below rippled with soft, dark folds. Lena paused at the start of the bridge, sensing something. Not danger exactly, but attention. She turned to her sister. "You okay back there?" she asked. Mara nodded, just cold. They continued walking, the wooden planks creaking beneath their weight. Halfway across, the town's lights behind them dimmed, swallowed by the fog rolling off the river. The mist curled around their feet and rose like slow breath from the water. The night grew quiet, drearily so. Even the crickets had stopped. Then a sound broke through, a single sharp clink like metal striking metal. Both girls froze, probably the railing. Lena whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. But Mara was staring at the far end of the bridge. "Did you see that?" "See what?" "A shape by the post. Someone standing there." Lena squinted, but the fog distorted everything. The bridge lights flickered, then steadied. She grabbed Mara's wrist gently. "Come on, it's probably just one of the workers." But Riverbend's bridge crew didn't work nights. Everyone in town knew that. They pushed forward, step by cautious step. The shape didn't move. For a moment, Lena considered turning back, but home was closer than the community center, and logic overrode fear. As they neared the figure, the fog parted, but there was nothing. No one, just a cold breath of wind that lifted Lena's hair. "See?" Lena forced a smile. "Fog's playing tricks." Mara didn't answer. She was staring over the bridge railing into the black water below. "Lena, something's down there." Ripples spread slowly across the surface, unnatural, circular, as though disturbed by something recently submerged. A faint reflection shimmered, broken and incomplete. It looked almost like a person standing in shallow water, but as the ripples faded, the image dissolved. "Let's go," Lena said firmly. Her voice wavered now. The sisters picked up their pace, stepping off the bridge and onto the dirt path leading home. The moment their shoes hit solid ground, a distant voice drifted behind them, soft, unintelligible, but unmistakably human. They didn't look back. By morning, the Carter household would be silent, their beds untouched, their jackets still missing. A neighbor walking her dog would notice the front door slightly ajar, and at 6:12 a.m., a fisherman on the riverbank would call the sheriff's office after seeing a pale, wavering silhouette standing in the water near the very place the sisters had paused. It wasn't a person, it couldn't have been, yet the impression lingered long enough to unnerve even the responding officers. Later that day, search parties would gather at Briarwood Bridge. Questions would form without answers. And the town of Riverbend, unaware of the decades, long silence ahead, would take its first collective breath of fear. The first 48 hours were about to begin. By sunrise on October 18, 1972, the quiet buzz of Riverbend had exploded into alarm. The Carter sisters' empty beds, the half-open front door, the abandoned path leading back toward town, none of it added up. What frightened investigators most was the precision of the silence. No signs of struggle. No footprints disturbed, no note, no reason. Sheriff Roy Halden, then only 4 years into his post, arrived at the Carter home just after 7 a.m. He was met by Helen Carter, pale and trembling, clutching the girls' jackets, still damp from the evening fog. When Halden asked when she last heard from her daughters, her voice cracked. They were walking home. They should have been here before midnight. Neighbors gathered across the street in tight clusters, whispering behind gloved hands. These were people who rarely locked their doors, people who believed danger lived somewhere else. The empty walkway leading toward Briarwood Bridge felt like a wound across the neighborhood. By mid-morning, the sheriff's office had mobilized volunteers. Dozens of locals trudged down riverbank trails, combing through reeds and mud. Others moved toward the bridge, calling the girls' names into the mist. Heavy air. Dogs barked against their leashes, picking up scents that vanished near the water. One of the earliest clues surfaced within hours. A retired postman, Albert Firth, claimed he heard something around 11 p.m., a girl crying, maybe arguing. He admitted he didn't see anyone, but the sound, he said, came from the direction of the bridge or close to it. The statement was logged but raised unanswered questions. If the sisters reached the bridge at that hour, why hadn't anyone else seen them? The road wasn't isolated. Cars occasionally passed. Someone should have noticed. At 10:14 a.m., the first critical discovery was made. 2 school bags, Lena's burgundy canvas bag and Mara's smaller blue one, were found neatly placed on the east railing of Briarwood Bridge. No torn straps. No signs of being dropped or thrown, just arranged. Sheriff Halden crouched beside them, running a gloved finger along the railing. It was cold, wet, and the fog hadn't lifted since dawn. These bags couldn't have sat here long without soaking through, yet both were almost dry. It suggested someone returned them deliberately after the sisters vanished. Helen Carter collapsed upon hearing this, sobbing into the deputy's coat. Halden steadied her, though his face betrayed the same unease the searchers felt. Lost children left chaos behind, not order. By late afternoon, Riverbend transformed into a different town. Patrol cars lined the bridge, flashlights cut through the fog. Reporters from the regional station arrived, their cameras capturing the sheriff's forced calm. Already the word "missing" felt too small. Inside the temporary command tent, investigators pieced together a fragile timeline. The sisters left the community center at approximately 9:40 p.m. Witnesses saw them heading toward Willow Lane. After that, details dissolved into guesswork. No confirmed sightings, no fights, no signs of running away. Lena was responsible, steady. Mara was shy, deeply attached to home. Still, the river remained the most unsettling possibility. At 5:22 p.m., a fisherman gave a statement. He'd seen a strange reflection near the center of the bridge around dawn. He insisted it looked like someone standing in the water, motionless. But when deputies checked the area, nothing remained. No footprints, no drag marks, no disturbed mud. "Reflections can lie," one officer muttered. "Not always." The fisherman replied. Night fell fast, swallowing the bridge in gray, blue darkness. The search lights, strung from one end of the steel arches to the other, hummed like angry insects. The town's anxiety thickened with the descending cold. Still no trace of the sisters. When the clock hit the 48-hour mark, Sheriff Halden stared at the caseboard, his jaw clenched. Most missing person cases, he knew, hinged on this window. After it closed, hope thinned like mist drifting off the river. He turned toward his deputies. "Tomorrow," he said, "we widen the search, and we start asking questions we didn't want to ask. None of them knew yet that the trail was already cooling. And within weeks, the case file itself would start to close. By the end of the second week, the urgency that once electrified Riverbend had begun to thin. The posters stapled to telephone poles curled at the edges from rain. Volunteers dwindled as the days grew colder, offering quiet apologies that sounded too much like surrender. Even the dogs, once fierce in their search, now whimpered at the river's edge, confused by trails that evaporated into the damp wind. Sheriff Roy Halden continued to lead daily briefings, but the exhaustion in his voice betrayed him. Deputies reported the same findings each morning: no new footprints, no personal items, no signs the Carter sisters had ever stepped beyond the bridge. The river, sluggish and dark, kept its secrets beneath a sheet of rippling silence. Inside the Carter home, grief settled with a weight that bent the walls inward. Helen Carter walked the hallway each night, pausing at her daughter's door, but never entering. She kept their room untouched, Mara's sketchbook open on the desk, Lena's jacket draped over the chair, the faint scent of lavender lingering like a ghost. Their father, Tom Carter, returned from work each day with more questions than answers, and fewer words than either parent could bear. The stillness between them grew sharper with every passing hour. Rumors began circulating through Riverbend, each more unsettling than the last. Some whispered the girls had run away. Others claimed they'd seen headlights on the bridge that night. A few murmured about a stranger passing through town earlier that week. But none of the stories held weight. None led anywhere. By mid-November, the investigation hit a wall. Deputies had combed every trail, dredged stretches of the river, and interviewed nearly everyone in the town. The initial surge of leads had dissolved into dead ends. The sheriff's department, limited and under pressure, made the decision no one wanted voiced out loud. The active search would be reduced. When Sheriff Halden informed the Carters, Helen's face drained of all color. "You're giving up," she whispered. "We're not." Halden insisted, though even he struggled to believe it. "We're regrouping. The case stays open." Open, but quiet. The decision fractured the Carter family further. Tom withdrew, working longer hours, returning home late. Helen began keeping a journal of every detail she remembered from the days before the disappearance, convinced she'd missed something small, something vital. She asked repeatedly for access to the case file, but her requests were delayed, redirected, and eventually ignored. The silence grew heavier as winter approached. In early December, the sheriff's office conducted its final scheduled river sweep. The water had dropped several inches, exposing slick rocks and patches of muddy shoreline. Deputies moved through the cold mist without speaking, knowing they wouldn't find what they hoped. They were right. Nothing surfaced, no bodies, no clothing, no trace the sisters had ever been there. Back in his office, Halden studied the evidence board. Photos, timelines, statements, all tacked with red pins that led nowhere. He pressed his hands against his temples. Where did they go? But the question felt like it belonged to another time, one slipping out of reach. On March 2, 1973, Helen made one final attempt to access the file. She arrived at the station, trembling but determined. A deputy disappeared into the records room and returned minutes later with an answer that chilled her. "The file isn't available," he said. "It's been sealed." Sealed by who? He hesitated. "We're not sure." Helen stepped back, breath shaking. Something more than loss was gripping the case now. Something controlled, hidden, deliberate, and far from the sheriff's office, beneath rusting steel beams and drifting fog, the bridge waited quietly. 16 years later, it would give up its first secret. For nearly 3 decades, the disappearance of Lena and Mara Carter lived in Riverbend like a shadow stitched to the town's memory, visible enough to unsettle, distant enough to ignore. The bridge where the sisters vanished had rusted into a relic, its steel beams flaking like old scars. Most residents avoided it, except teenagers daring each other to cross at night, and fishermen who swore the river still held sounds it shouldn't. By 1999, Riverbend had grown quieter, older. The general store had closed. The Carter home had been sold twice. The sheriff's office was run by a new chief who rarely mentioned the past unless asked directly, and if anyone still remembered the sisters, they did so in passing, like an old cautionary tale. But the bridge wouldn't stay silent forever. When the county approved long-awaited renovations for Briarwood Bridge, construction crews arrived with machinery that shook the whole shoreline. Rusted bolts were torn out, beams stripped back, and sections of the bridge opened for reinforcement. At first, it was a routine job. Then the river delivered something back. On a thick morning in August, construction worker Dale Merrick was sandblasting one of the inner support beams when he noticed something lodged deep inside a narrow seam, an object half buried in rust and sediment. It looked like a crumpled scrap of plastic. He reached in with pliers, tugged twice, and felt it give way. A small Polaroid photograph, water, damaged around the edges, slid into his gloved hand. At first glance, it was little more than a blur, faded colors, distorted shapes. But when Dale wiped the surface with his sleeve, the outline hit him with a jolt so sharp he took a step back. Two girls, running, one looking over her shoulder. He didn't know their names, but Riverbend's older residents would have recognized them instantly. Within an hour, the sheriff's office had been contacted. Within 3, the photo was laid flat beneath protective glass in the evidence room. Sheriff Marla Granger, who had inherited the cold case files when she took office, stared at the image long after her deputies had stepped away. The details were faint but unmistakable. The younger girl's braided hair, the older one's jacket pulled tight as though caught mid-motion. Could it be real? A deputy asked. Granger didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the lower corner of the photo. There, reflected in the river below the bridge, was a distorted silhouette, too tall to be either sister, too still to be a trick of motion. A blurred figure standing in the water, its outline leaning toward the girls like something reaching through time. Experts were called in. The Polaroid was tested, dried, scanned, and enhanced as much as technology would allow. What emerged unsettled everyone who saw the digital reconstruction. The reflection wasn't the girls. And it wasn't the photographers. Someone else had been there. Over the next days, news of the discovery rippled through town. Elderly residents who had lived through the original investigation returned with trembling questions. Younger families whispered about curses, warnings, ghosts, but beneath the superstition was a simple, undeniable truth. The river had given back a piece of the night it held for 27 years. Sheriff Granger reopened the Carter case officially on August 19, 1999. Boxes of forgotten files were hauled from storage, including one marked simply restricted. Its edges dusty, its lock recently replaced. The first item placed beside it was the Polaroid. And as investigators gathered around the table, a single question settled over the room like fog. Who took the picture? The answer, they would soon learn, was buried in the image, waiting to be revealed. The old photograph lay on the center of the table beneath a single flickering lamp, its edges curled, its surface speckled with time. Detective Harris had carried it around for nearly 3 decades, first in his wallet, then in a file, then in a sealed box he swore he'd never open again. But everything changed yesterday, with a witness coming forward, with details that aligned too perfectly. He no longer had the luxury of ignoring what the picture might reveal. It was time to dissect what had once merely haunted him. He slipped on cotton gloves and exhaled slowly. Across the table sat forensic analyst Mara Lynn, the department's quiet genius, someone who preferred pixels over people, but whose mind never missed a detail. She studied the image with a seriousness usually reserved for crime scene evidence. "Tell me everything you know," she said. Harris rubbed the back of his neck. "It was taken the day before they disappeared. No one thought much of it then. A farewell photo, something simple, But the witness claims this picture wasn't accidental. He said someone posed them intentionally, like a final message. Mara nodded. Let's see if the image supports that. She fed the photo into the scanner, and within seconds, the old memory reappeared on her 4K monitor, magnified to a level that made every crease and shadow feel suddenly alive. Harris leaned in. Even after decades, the faces still struck him, the forced smiles, the awkward positioning, the faint unease no one had noticed until it was far too late. Mara zoomed in on the background. "What's this?" she murmured. Behind the subjects, barely visible in the original print, was the faint outline of a figure near the tree line, distorted by distance. Harris felt his pulse quicken. That shape wasn't documented in the initial reports. He said, "No," Mara replied, "but it's definitely a person. See the shadow, shoulders, head, stance. Someone was watching them." Harris tried to recall the scene from memory, but time had diluted everything except the loss. "We always assumed they were alone that day. Someone didn't want you to see this. Look here." She adjusted the filters. The more she enhanced the image, the clearer the silhouette became. And something else too. A reflection in the lake behind them. A second figure, smaller, crouched. Harris's throat tightened. Two of them. Possibly more, Mara said, voice steady but eyes narrowing with the thrill of discovery. "This photograph doesn't capture a moment. It captures a setup." For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as though the photo were expanding with secrets long buried. Mara toggled between light spectrums, deepening the analysis. "There's a pattern here," she said at last. "The angle of sunlight, the shadow lengths, the framing. It wasn't taken casually. The photographer knew exactly where to stand." Harris clenched his jaw. "Meaning this wasn't a keepsake. It was staged?" She gave a single grim nod, and whoever staged it wanted to be remembered. A chill rippled down his spine. After 27 years, the case had always felt like a door welded shut. But now, with one image, it was cracking open, the hinges straining. Mara pointed to the left edge of the frame. "Something else is here. Look closely." Harris leaned forward and froze. Etched faintly into the bark of a tree, nearly invisible without digital enhancement, were 3 carved letters. Not initials, not random marks, a code, one he had seen before. His breath caught. "This changes everything," he whispered. Mara's voice softened. "Then the next step is obvious. We need to find where this was carved." And just like that, the investigation surged alive again, pulling them toward answers that had waited 27 years to be found. The river looked different now, narrower, quieter, as if age had carved out its energy, the way time had carved lines across Detective Harris's face. He stood at the bank, boots sinking into the soft earth, staring at the exact patch of woods visible in the enhanced photograph. 27 years earlier, he had walked this same trail with half the department, searching, calling out names that were never answered. Today, he wasn't searching for children. He was searching for the man who watched them. Behind him, Mara Lynn adjusted her backpack and unfolded the printed still of the enhanced image. "The tree should be about 30 yards north," she said, scanning the terrain. "If the carving survived weather damage, we'll find it." Harris nodded but kept his eyes on the river. The current whispered against fallen branches, carrying a familiar chill. "This place hasn't changed," he murmured. "It still feels like something's hiding." "Maybe it is," Mara replied softly. They moved through the underbrush, the forest canopy blocking most of the afternoon light. Birds scattered as they approached the old birch tree, its bark pale and peeling, but still standing. Harris reached it first, his breath stilled. There they were, 3 carved letters, the same cryptic marking found at 2 other unsolved disappearances from the early 90s cases dismissed at the time as unrelated. Harris brushed his fingers over the grooves, sharper than he expected, as if carved with intention, not haste. "This confirms it," Mara said, crouching to photograph it. The same individual was here. Harris stepped back, looking around. trying to see the forest as it had been decades ago. That's when he heard it. A snap of a twig behind them. Both turned. An old man stood at the clearing's edge, leaning on a wooden cane. Thin, weathered, wrapped in a heavy coat despite the mild weather. His eyes, pale and steady, watched them with unsettling calm. "You shouldn't be here," the man said. Harris instinctively shifted to shield Mara. "This is a police investigation. Who are you?" The man's gaze flicked to the tree. "That mark? You found it again." Harris stiffened again. The man took a slow step forward. His cane pressed into the soil, leaving small, deep holes. "I told them years ago what I saw. No one listened." Mara exchanged a sharp look with Harris. "What exactly did you see?" The old man's lips thinned. "Him, the watcher." The words settled in the air like a cold fog. Harris moved closer. "Describe him." The man's hands trembled around the cane. Tall, limp in his left leg, always wore a hat, even in warm weather. He came down to this river often, too often. His eyes drifted toward the tree line, as if expecting the figure to emerge at any moment. "And he never came alone." A chill prickled Mara's arms. "You mean there were others with him? Children?" The man whispered, "Not always the same ones." Harris felt his heartbeat thudding in his ears. "Why didn't you report it?" "I did," the man snapped, voice cracking. "But they wrote me off as a crazy old hermit. Said I imagined things, but I know what I saw." He lowered his voice. "And he's not gone. People think he died. He didn't." Silence fell, broken only by the river's quiet rush. Mara stepped forward gently. "Do you know where he went, where he might be now?" The man lifted a trembling finger and pointed up river. "He had a cabin," he said, "hidden beyond the ridge. You'll find it if you keep going, but be careful." He leaned closer, voice barely above a breath. "Because if he sees you first, he won't let you leave." Harris felt the weight of the words settle deep in his chest. A cabin, a watcher, a survivor willing to speak at last. He exchanged a glance with Mara, both knowing exactly what the next chapter of this long, dead investigation demanded. They had to go upriver, and they had to go now. The drive back to the sheriff's office was silent, heavy with everything the old man had revealed. A hidden cabin, a watcher who never truly disappeared. Harris kept replaying the man's trembling voice in his mind, each word stitching itself into the investigation like a thread they should have pulled on decades earlier. Mara sat beside him, eyes fixed on her tablet, scrolling through case files with renewed urgency. "We'll need every archived document from 72 to 99, she said, breaking the silence. "Anything connected to disappearances within 50 miles of this river." Harris nodded, gripping the wheel tighter. "And we need to know why this wasn't followed up. Someone had to interview that witness back then." Mara didn't look up, unless someone made sure it never happened. When they reached the archive room, the air smelled of old paper and dust. A familiar scent Harris had always associated with forgotten truths. Rows of metal cabinets lined the walls, most untouched for years. Mara unlocked cabinet 14B, where the original case documents for the Sisters' Disappearance should have been stored. They weren't. Instead, a slim folder sat alone on the shelf, labeled with a case number but missing the usual evidence tags. Mara pulled it out carefully. The moment she opened it, her eyebrows tightened. Half the pages were blacked out, entire paragraphs, dates, names, gone. These weren't scanned like this, Mara said, flipping through the redacted sheets. This was done manually. Someone printed the originals again and censored them. Harris felt his pulse rise, checked the backside. Older redactions sometimes leave indentations. Mara held a page up to the light. Their faint impressions just barely visible. She rubbed a soft pencil over the paper, and the indentations revealed fragments of words. River, cabin, Birch Ridge. She swallowed. Someone mentioned the cabin in the original report. Harris exhaled sharply. Meaning someone did investigate that witness. And someone erased it. Mara added. She reached deeper into the folder and found a smaller envelope tucked between the pages. It was unmarked, sealed with yellowing tape. When she opened it, a group of photos slid out, grainy black and white images taken at the riverbank the morning after the sisters vanished. Most showed the search teams, but one image made them both freeze. A man stood behind crime scene tape, watching the investigators from the trees, hat pulled low, hands in his coat pockets, left leg slightly bent, as if favoring it. The same man from the enhanced reflection. And likely the same man the old witness had described. Mara flipped the photo over. A handwritten note on the back read, "Individual seen twice during search. Claims to be local. No records found. Returns to river repeatedly. Monitor closely." Underneath that indifferent handwriting, a second line was added, "Do not pursue. Orders from above." Mara's breath hitched. Orders from above? Who was above the sheriff in 72? Harris already knew. State investigators, maybe federal, anyone who thought digging too deep would open the wrong doors. He reached for the rest of the envelope and found one more document, a typewritten memo. The top half was covered entirely in black ink. The bottom half remained readable. Potential link to prior incident in 68. Subject displays pattern behavior. Surveillance recommended but not executed. Reason withheld. Pattern behavior. Mara whispered. Meaning he didn't just happen upon the sisters. He'd done this before, and someone protected him. Harris said. A cold stillness settled between them. Mara gathered the scattered pages. We have to cross. Reference every redacted name, every missing file. Someone went to great lengths to bury this. Harris stepped back, staring at the empty cabinet shelf. If the cabin is still there, whatever's inside might explain why. Mara closed the folder slowly, her voice steady but tense. Then the next step is clear. Harris nodded. They had to go upriver, and this time they were going in knowing someone, past or present. Never wanted them to find what waited there. The storm rolled in just as Harris and Mara returned to the main office, the kind of slow-moving, heavy rain that made the town feel smaller than ever. Thunder trembled against the windows as they laid the redacted documents across the conference table, spreading out the photos, the memo, and the damaged case notes like pieces of an unfinished puzzle. But one question echoed louder than the rain. Who silenced the original witness? Mara leaned over the pages, tracing her finger along the blacked-out lines. Someone talked back then. Someone knew something they weren't supposed to. She looked at Harris sharply. And they tried to confess. Harris nodded. I remember a rumor. Something older deputies used to mention when they thought I wasn't listening. A man who came in a week after the sisters vanished, scared, shaking, said he needed to clear his head before it was too late. What happened to him? Mara asked. That's the thing, Harris said. Every time I asked, they shut it down, said the report was lost, or that he recanted, or that it was just a drunken misunderstanding. Mara exhaled slowly. And you never pushed. Harris's jaw tightened. I was 24, barely sworn in. You didn't question senior deputies back then. A crack of thunder rolled across the ceiling as Mara turned toward the old audio locker. If he came here, she said, protocol required a recording, even if it never made it into the official case file. Together they sifted through the dusty boxes until Mara pulled out a small reel tape, its label faded but legible under the dust. Interview 7/22/72 unresolved intake. No name, no signature, just a date. 1 week after the sisters disappeared. Mara threaded the tape into the old machine. Harris dimmed the lights. The machine clicked, hummed, then filled the room with static. Cold, heavy, and old enough to feel like a ghost breathing. A trembling male voice emerged. I saw him again. By the river. The same man from before. The girls weren't supposed to. A harsh cut of static swallowed the rest. New audio replaced it. Different tone, different energy. A deputy's voice, firm, controlled. Sir, if you're making accusations, I need you to understand the severity. I'm telling you, you're not listening. He said he'd come after me if I talked. Another burst of static. Then nothing. The rest of the tape played out in low mechanical hum. No voices, no confession, no resolution. The abrupt silence at the end felt deliberate, as if something had been clipped out, erased. Mara hit stop. There's at least 20 minutes missing. Harris stared at the machine, his shoulders sinking. Someone shut him up. Either he walked out, or someone made sure he didn't finish. Mara rewound the last few seconds, listening again to the fragment about the man by the river. Same description, same behavior. He's in every piece of evidence we uncover. And yet, Harris said, every attempt to expose him ends the same way. Silenced, buried, or redacted. Mara lifted her eyes to him. Which means whatever he knew, whatever he did, someone considered it worth protecting. Lightning flashed against the window, illuminating the mess of papers scattered across the table. Then the phone rang. A single, sharp tone that cut through the storm. Mara answered, her face stiffened. "Sheriff, you need to hear this. We just received a report. Someone found something near the old cabin site." Harris stood, heart pounding. Another clue had surfaced, and this time it wasn't going to be erased. Rain still clung to the windshield in sheets as Harris and Mara drove toward the river once more, the wipers thudding like a nervous heartbeat. The call they'd received spoke of an object washed loose near the old cabin foundation. Something metallic, half, buried in mud. Whatever it was, the deputy who found it insisted they come in person. The headlights swept over the trees, throwing long, skeletal shadows across the path. Mara leaned forward, scanning the woods. If the storm loosened something, it might have come from higher ground, could be old tools, could be debris, or... Harris said quietly, it could be something he left behind. They reached the riverbank, where Deputy Lowe waited beneath a tarp. His jacket was soaked, his face tense. "You need to see this," he said, leading them toward a shallow pit he had dug with his hands. "I kicked it loose when the mud gave way." He stepped aside. A small, rusted camera lay half-exposed in the dirt, a model from the early 70s. Harris felt the air shift. Mara crouched beside it, brushing mud from the metal casing. "If this still has film inside, we could see what he saw," Harris finished. Inside the office darkroom, the silence felt sacred. Mara handled the camera with gloved care, opening the back panel. A soggy but intact roll of film sat inside. Harris held his breath as she transferred it to the developing canister. "This film has aged almost 3 decades," she warned quietly. "Anything that comes out will be fragmented, damaged. Fragments are enough," Harris said. "We've built this entire investigation on fragments." Minutes stretched into an hour. Finally, Mara hung the developing strips on the drying line. The negatives were warped, cloudy, scarred with time, but shapes were visible. "Figures, shadows, a bridge. Let's scan them," Mara said. One by one, the images flickered onto the digital monitor ghostly, half-formed moments frozen in time. The first few showed trees, water, the riverbank. Then, there, Mara whispered, a photograph taken from behind someone, likely the photographer, standing under the old bridge. The structure looked almost identical to how it appeared today, except cleaner, newer. The water below it rippled gently, reflecting 2 figures near the center of the bridge. 2 girls, the sisters, but it wasn't the girls that made the room feel suddenly colder. It was what stood behind them. A tall, shadowed figure on the far side of the bridge, barely visible except for the faint outline of a long coat and a hat pulled low. The same silhouette from the enhanced reflection, the same stance, the same angle of the left leg, the same man who had been stalking the river for decades. Mara zoomed in, enhancing the contrast. The reflection on the water distorted his features, but the shape was unmistakable. "He was there," she murmured, right behind them, watching. Harris swallowed hard. This wasn't a random disappearance. He followed them to the bridge. He positioned himself out of sight, but close enough to act. Another photo loaded, taken seconds later. This time the girls were turned slightly, as if hearing something behind them. The reflection in the water elongated, stretched, as though the figure had taken a step forward. Mara leaned back, her face pale. Whoever took this picture witnessed the first moment something went wrong. A final image appeared, blurry, as if the photographer had moved suddenly. The frame tilted wildly, capturing only splintered wood, broken light, and in the corner, a man's hand, gripping the bridge rail. Then the sequence ended. Silence filled the room. Harris spoke first. This is why the confession never made it into the file. This is why the witness was terrified. He saw the man on the bridge, and he knew what happened next. Mara's voice was barely above a whisper. This isn't just evidence. This is the moment the case shifts. She closed the laptop slowly. We need to go back, she said, to the bridge, at the exact spot where this picture was taken. Harris nodded. Because whatever happened that night, whatever the reflection was trying to reveal, still waited beneath that bridge, and after 27 years, it was finally ready to surface. The morning after analyzing the camera film, Harris and Mara returned to the office exhausted but alert, their thoughts circling the same revelation. Someone had been close enough to the sisters on that bridge to capture the exact moment their fate shifted. But if there was one photographer, there might have been more evidence left behind. When Harris walked into his office, Deputy Lowe was already waiting, clutching a plastic evidence bag with both hands. His expression was strained, equal parts excitement and unease. "You're not going to believe what came in," he said quietly. "A woman from the old Birch Ridge community dropped this off. Said she found it in a box of her late husband's things." Inside the bag lay a Polaroid photograph, edges yellowed, corners worn, but unmistakably vintage. Mara stepped forward immediately. "Is it from '72? She asked. Lowe nodded. "She said her husband used to volunteer during the river searches. Claims he took a lot of photos that summer." Mara turned the Polaroid over. On the back, in faded ink, was a date, 7/19/72. 4 days before the girls disappeared. She whispered. Harris motioned to the digital scanner. "Let's see what's on it." As the image processed on the monitor, their breaths synchronized in the heavy silence. Slowly the picture sharpened, a wide shot of the old bridge, empty, except there, Mara said, pointing at the far right edge. A tiny figure stood halfway down the embankment, the same hat, the same long coat, the same tilted leg. He was staring at the bridge as if studying it, waiting. But it wasn't the man that made the room tense. It was something else, something faint but unmistakable near the center of the photo. A reflection. Even though no one stood on the bridge in the moment the photo was taken, the reflection in the water showed 2 silhouettes, 2 girls, standing side by side. Harris leaned closer, forehead tight with concentration. How is that possible if this was taken 4 days earlier? Then who are those figures? Mara didn't answer. She zoomed further. The reflection was distorted but eerie in its clarity, as if echoing a moment from the future. 2 girls, their posture identical to the sisters, the smaller figure holding something in her left hand, a bracelet that the original reports said went missing with them. "It's them," Mara whispered. "The sisters, but this picture was taken before they disappeared." Harris shook his head. "Reflections can't come from the future, unless the photo captured something else," Mara said quietly. "A memory on the river, an imprint of what was going to happen, or—" She hesitated. The photographer staged something. Harris turned the Polaroid over again. The handwriting on the back was shaky. At the bottom corner, nearly faded away, a single line had been added. "Caught him watching again. Same place, same stare." Again, Harris repeated. Meaning the photographer saw him more than once. Mara looked up. The husband knew something. He was tracking this man before the girls even went missing. Another line, barely visible, ran along the very edge of the Polaroid. "If anything happens to me, look under the bridge." The room went silent. Mara spoke first, her voice tense and steady. This wasn't just a man with a camera. This was someone trying to warn the future. Harris grabbed his coat. "Then we need to go back to the bridge, not to the riverbank under it." Mara nodded. Because whatever the photographer hid, there whatever he feared would be erased, was finally calling to them. Night had already settled by the time Harris and Mara returned to the old bridge. A thin layer of fog clung low to the water, drifting like pale breath rising from the riverbed. Their flashlights carved narrow tunnels of light through the darkness as they climbed down the embankment, stepping carefully over damp rocks and slippery roots. Under the bridge, Mara said quietly, repeating the faded warning on the Polaroid. Whatever he hid it here. Harris crouched, shining his light across the underside of the wooden planks overhead. Time had rotted the beams. Water dripped in slow, steady beats. Something glinted near the center, a faint shimmer buried in silt. Harris moved closer, a metal box, rusted at the corners, its lid wedged shut. Mara knelt beside him. This has been here for decades. They carried it to the riverbank, the box heavy with mud and age. Mara used a flat-headed tool to pry the lid open. It resisted at first, then gave with a sharp crack. Inside, wrapped in decaying fabric, were objects that time had almost swallowed: a folded piece of paper, a bracelet, a small cassette tape, and a photograph. Mara lifted the bracelet first, silver, delicate with a tiny engraved star. She froze. Anna wore this. She whispered. Her mother said it was a birthday gift. They never found it. The river had kept it safe. Harris unfolded the paper next. The ink had bled over the decades, but one line remained painfully clear. He watches from the shadows. He knows the river hides him. Underneath it, another line barely survived. If something happens to me. The tape tells everything. Mara's hand trembled as she picked up the cassette. The label was handwritten, nearly dissolved by water and mud, but the date was still readable, 7/21/72 night before. Harris exhaled slowly. The night before they disappeared. He recorded something. Mara's flashlight found the final item. A photograph, water. Damaged but intact enough to make out the image. The same photographer's perspective, taken from behind the trees. The same coat and hat, visible near the base of the bridge. But this time the man wasn't watching strangers. He was watching the photographer. The angle of the shadow, the posture. Everything about it radiated danger. He knew he was being followed. Mara whispered. The photographer wasn't just documenting him. He was confronting him. Harris turned to the bridge above them, listening to the soft whisper of water. If that man realized someone was tracking him, he could have silenced him. Maybe the photographer never made it out of here. Mara stood slowly. Then, this box is evidence he hid at the last moment. Something he wanted the world to find eventually. Something he knew could end the silence. Harris pocketed the cassette carefully. We need to play this tonight. Mara nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on the bridge, on the exact spot where the Polaroid reflection had shown the girls. The river tried to keep the truth buried, she said softly, but it didn't erase it. Harris swept his light across the water one last time. The reflection rippled but held a stillness that felt sentient, waiting. Let's go, he said. Whatever the tape holds, it's our missing piece. They climbed up the embankment toward the car, unaware that behind them, beneath the oldest beam of the bridge, something else shifted gently in the water. Something the river had not finished giving back. The riverbank felt different that morning, quieter, as if the trees and water had struck an uneasy truce in the wake of what had been uncovered the previous night. The pieces were finally aligning, yet the answers seemed to slip through the investigators' fingers like the current itself. After decades of silence, the river was speaking, and it wasn't whispering. It was demanding to be heard. Detective Mara Hale stood at the edge of the muddy bank, replaying the events from Chapter 11 in her mind. The discovery of the submerged metal box, the old locket preserved inside it, and the chilling realization that someone had returned to the water long after the sisters vanished. Whatever happened in 1972 had not been a closed chapter. Someone had been tending to the lies, polishing them, hiding them, protecting them. The river had held it secret, but human hands had maintained it. She scanned the surface. Mist hovered above it, making the river look like a breathing thing, alive, watchful, unsettled. If you kept one truth, she murmured to herself, what else is down there? Behind her, Officer Ray Calder hauled equipment toward their small operations tent. "Coroner's report is in," he called out, slightly breathless, "and you're going to want to sit down for this." Mara didn't move. "Just tell me." Ray hesitated. "Never a good sign. The fingerprints on the metal box. They aren't old. They're recent. Maybe just a few months, maybe less." Mara closed her eyes. Another confirmation. Someone was still guarding the story. Ray added, "And the locket. The clasp wasn't broken. It was intentionally opened. Someone removed a photo." That detail sat like a stone in Mara's stomach. A photo removed from a locket preserved for decades. Why? Who was being erased? As they spoke, divers were preparing to return to the river. They needed to search deeper, further downstream, toward the bend where the current grew more aggressive. Overnight, a drone scan had shown unnatural shapes beneath the surface, shapes too symmetrical to be natural formations, boxes, crates, evidence, or something far worse. The lead diver approached Mara. "We start in 15. Currents moderate today. Ideal conditions if we're going to recover anything intact. Be thorough," Mara said. "That river has been swallowing evidence for half a century. Today, it gives some of it back." As the divers slipped beneath the surface one by one, Mara studied the photos they had tacked to a board inside the tent. The sisters smiling at a school event, the bridge they were last seen crossing, and now. The locket, 3 timelines intersecting in one place. Hours passed with only crackling radio updates, static, current shifts, drift patterns. Then a voice came through sharply. "Detective, we found something." Mara ran. Ray followed close behind. A diver surfaced, clutching a clear evidence bag. Inside was something dark, tangled. Hair, no. Fabric. A piece of a waterlogged dress, faded beyond recognition yet unmistakably from the 1970s. Along its hem clung tiny beads, blue and white, the exact colors the youngest sister had worn in her last known photograph. But that wasn't what froze the air. Attached to the fabric was a small rusted safety pin, and threaded through it a Polaroid half, destroyed by water but still visible enough to make hearts stop. A girl, one of the sisters, standing near the riverbank, and behind her, reflected faintly in the water's surface, was a silhouette. A tall figure, watching, waiting. Ray whispered this. This wasn't an accident. Mara's voice was barely audible. Someone staged this photo. Someone brought her here. The diver handed over another small object. Found near the same spot, it was a silver ring, engraved on the inside with initials, not the sisters, an adult's, male. The engraving had worn thin, but the letters were still visible. R. H. Mara's breath caught. "No, it can't be." Ray's face drained of color. "Your father." She didn't answer, couldn't. The possibility struck like lightning. Sudden, blinding, unacceptable. Her father had been a young deputy in 1972, assigned to the original case. He had always told her the river took things that nobody could recover. Had he been warning her, or hiding something? Mara steadied herself. "We follow the evidence. No assumptions." But inside, a fracture had formed. The river had given them truths, but each truth carried a shadow, and now that shadow had a name. As the sun lowered, staining the water with gold and red, Mara whispered the words she had repeated since childhood. The phrase her father taught her on their walks by this same riverbank. Only now they sounded different, accusatory, heavy. The river never forgets. Sometimes it reflects what people tried so hard to hide.